begin our presentation, which, as you are well aware, is on Jewish perspectives on food justice. This is a really exciting topic, something that's near and dear to my own heart, and we have 4 incredible speakers who are lined up and whom I will introduce momentarily. However, before I do that, I did want to take a moment and talk about why we're hosting this webinar today. And that's because today is the first annual Food Day. Food Day is an incredible opportunity, incredible organization that seeks to bring together people from all walks of life. Parents, teachers, students, health professionals, community organizers, local officials, chefs, religious groups, and anyone who eats, basically. And really bringing people together with a push for healthy, affordable foods produced in sustainable and humane ways. The Union for Reform Judaism, as well as the Women of Reform Judaism, are proud partner organizations of Food Day. In fact, Rabbi Eric Yaffe, who's the president of the Union for Reform Judaism, sits on the Food Day Advisory Board, along with other incredible food justice leaders. The honorary co-chairs are Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, Senator Tom Harkins. Also on the advisory board, Orrin B. Hesterman, Michael Pollan, Alice Waters, many, many others. We're thrilled to be partners in this important campaign and to help bring light to the food injustices of the world and figure out how each of us in our own personal lives and in the general community can truly make a difference. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Susan Pakin. Susan is an Eisendress Legislative Assistant at the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, and she's going to be starting us off today by framing our time together. So Susan, you're up.
Thanks, Naomi, and thank you, everyone, for joining us on this special presentation today. I hope everyone had a delicious lunch or something to eat to celebrate Food Day. Because today I'd like to start off by discussing the grocery store. And these days, grocery shopping is no quick trip for me, and I find I'm confronted with endless choices about how do I eat ethically. Do I buy this organic tomato shipped from across the country, or do I buy the locally but conventionally grown one? Is processed tofu better for the environment and better for my health is it better than humanely slaughtered but grass-fed beef? And these questions can be overwhelming, and their answers are even more complex. But just as we turn to our Jewish tradition to learn how to live ethically, we can learn how to eat ethically as well. And as we all know, at any Jewish celebration, food serves many purposes. First and foremost, it nourishes us. But it also serves a more symbolic purpose. It helps us remember. We dip parsley in salt water to remember the suffering of our ancestors in Egypt, and the honey-dipped apples of Rosh Hashanah cause us to think of the sweetness of the year to come. And for many of us, things like kugel or brisket or kasha varnishkas remind us of the family gatherings of our childhood. Judaism teaches that we must not forget the other, a lesson that we can apply directly to our food consumption and production. We read in Deuteronomy, verse 24, line 21, when you gather the grapes of your vineyard, do not pick it over again. That shall go to the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. Always remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore, do as I command you to do this thing. The impetus for ensuring that others less fortunate than us have access to healthy food is remembering that our ancestors were once also in need. Now, our modern agricultural system does not adhere to these practices or these values and has unfortunately disenfranchised people from the freedom that comes with having access to and control over one's food. Fresh produce is inaccessible in many urban and poor communities, leaving some 50 million Americans as food insecure or near hungry from time to time. And about 11% of the poorest Americans without cars live in food deserts, or areas where people are beyond walking distance to the nearest grocery store. And of course, the foods that we enjoy should promote, not undermine, our good health. As many as several 100,000 Americans die prematurely every year due to what we eat, with medical costs running well over $100 billion. And it's important to acknowledge these realities as we continue in the pursuit of tikkun olam, or healing the world. So today, on Food Day, we will delve deeper into the ways in which our tradition encourages us to eat ethically, how Jewish values can help us remember and connect with our heritage, how they inform our own eating, and help us fight for food justice in our own communities and around the world. So thank you so much for joining us today, and enjoy the presentation.
Thank you so much, Susan, for beautifully outlining how our faith can really help guide us through this maze of food choices which we face and which society faces today. I'd now like to pass the torch to Professor Richard Schwartz, who is the president of Jewish Vegetarians of North America, amongst the many other distinguished titles you see on your screen. Richard, take it away.
Thanks very much, Naomi. It's a pleasure to be here. And I want to start out by discussing 6 basic Jewish mandates that I believe point very strongly to vegetarianism as the ideal diet for Jews today. And these are to treat animals with compassion, to preserve our health, to protect the environment, to conserve natural resources, to help hungry people, and to seek and pursue peace. Next slide. And that's going to start with treating animals with compassion, a very important mandate in Judaism, Tzar B'Chayim, that the mandate not to inflict any unnecessary pain on animals. However, unfortunately, the reality is most farm animals today, including, unfortunately, those raised for kosher consumers, they're raised on factory farms. They live in very cramped, confined spaces. Egg-laying chickens, for example, don't even have enough space to raise one wing. These animals are often drugged and mutilated. They're denied fresh air, sunlight, any enjoyment of life, and exercise, for example, before they're slaughtered and eaten. So there's an inconsistency there, as we're going to see in other cases as well. And as the next slide indicates, Judaism has very strong teachings about compassion for animals. The Book of Psalms indicates that God's mercies are over all of his works, all of his creations. And the Book of Proverbs indicates the test for righteousness. A righteous person considers the lives of his animals. And other important teachings, actually compassion for animals is part of the 10 Commandments. It indicates that not only people, but animals as well are to rest on the Sabbath day. There are Torah commandments that we're not to yoke a strong and weak animal. We're not to muzzle an ox while it's threshing in the field. If we have a pet or a farm animal, we have to feed that animal first before sitting down to our own meal. And according to a midrash rabbinic teaching, it's a test for leadership. Both Moses, a great leader and teacher, and King David were chosen because they showed compassion to sheep when they were shepherds when young. And Rebekah was deemed suitable to be a wife for Isaac to continue the Jewish people because she ran and watered the 10 camels of Eliezer, the servant of Abraham. And in the next slide, it has another very important mandate. We're to preserve our health and take care of our lives. Pekuach Nefesh, a mandate to preserve human life. But there are many scientific studies that have linked animal-based diets directly to many chronic degenerative diseases.
They're in Maryland somewhere, but
heart disease, stroke, many forms of cancer. Okay. Are people hearing me over there? Okay. Now, this is arguably Judaism's most important mitzvah because without good health, we can't do other mitzvot, and it overrides other mitzvot. For example, if God forbid a life is in danger on a Sabbath day, then we must do everything possible to save that life, even if it violates the Shabbat. And in the next slide, it indicates many kinds of studies that have shown the negative health effects of animal-based diets, the benefits of plant-based diets, migration studies, for example, when people from Japan, other countries come to the U.S., change their diets, they start getting diseases they never had before. There are wartime studies that indicate that when people were forced to be on a vegetarian diet in wartime conditions, the death rate went down because of the vegetarian diet. Epidemiological studies, like the China study, where they went to many communities in China and they found more meat in the diet, more disease. And then there's Dr. Dean Ornish, who showed that on a plant-based diet, heart disease can actually be reversed. And the next slide, I just want to point out there are two myths that keep people away from animal-based, from switching to vegetarianism. There's a protein myth that stresses that we need a lot of protein in the diet, but actually we need very little. And the reason for that is the initial research was on rats who do need a lot of protein, but the human mother's milk, for example, only 5% of its calories are for protein, and that excess protein actually deletes calcium, so the person can be taking in a lot of calcium from dairy products, for example, and still be at a high risk for osteoporosis. Countries with the most osteoporosis, U.S., Scandinavian countries, Israel, countries where they get a lot of calcium, and you can get sufficient calcium from plant products. In the next slide, very important mandate to protect the environment. We are to be co-workers with God in preserving the world, but modern intensive livestock agriculture, involving 60 billion farmed animals worldwide, contributes substantially to global warming and the great threats to humanity. And the UN Food and Agriculture Organization study found amazingly that the livestock sector actually emits more greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide equivalents than all the cars, planes, ships, all the means of transportation combined. And again, with all this animal agriculture, many environmental problems, soil erosion, depletion, air and water pollution, many fertilizers and pesticides being used, washing into the waters, the rainforest being destroyed to produce land to grow feed crops and to provide grazing land, and many environmental problems. And the next slide indicates, many people say, well, we were given dominion, but our sages indicate that it really means responsible stewardship. It's not a blank check at all, and 2 verses in Genesis reinforce this idea that's responsible stewardship and not the ability to just do anything we want to environment, to animals. First, Genesis 1:29, Garden of Eden, God's first scientific law, strictly plant-based. By the way, the 2 ideal times in Judaism, Garden of Eden and the Messianic period, both are pictured as vegetarian periods. Then in the next chapter, Genesis, chapter 2, verse 15, the human role is indicated. The human being was put in the Garden of Eden to La'avda or Shamra, and that is to work the land, but also to guard it. Okay, the next slide indicates that a 4th mandate, we can say Diano, actually, every one of these are all important, but you know, we have all of these combined make a very strong case, I believe. The Jewish teaching Bal Tashchit, we are to use resources but not to waste, unnecessarily destroy anything of value, but animal-based diets use far more grain. It takes about 8 pounds of grain to produce 1 pound of beef, far more land, about 20 times as much, 14 times as much water per person on an animal-based diet than a plant-based diet, and about 10 times more energy per person. So very wasteful, violating that important Jewish mandate of Bal Tashchit. And the next slide indicates the Jewish sages extended teaching in Deuteronomy to make a general prohibition against wasting. But unfortunately, our society is based on waste, and as indicated in the bottom of the slide, it takes about 4,200 gallons per person on an animal-based diet, mostly for irrigating feed crops, but only about 300 gallons for a plant-based diet. That's where that 14-to-1 ratio comes in at a time when there's droughts in so many areas where water is becoming a big issue, very wasteful. Well, tying in with this idea of food justice, Judaism has very important teachings about assisting the poor, about sharing bread with hungry people, but unfortunately, it's incredibly 70% of the grain grown in the U.S. and about 40% of the grain grown worldwide is fed to animals destined for slaughter. Fatten them up, make as much profit as quickly as possible. And this is really scandalous at a time when about 1 billion of the world's people are chronically hungry, An estimated 20 million people worldwide die every year because of hunger and its effects. And as the next slide indicates, Judaism has very powerful teachings. The Torah says farmers should lead the corners of the field, the gleanings of the harvest for the poor. And as indicated in the prophetic reading on Yom Kippur, our holiest day, the true purpose of fasting, Isaiah points out, is to end oppression and to share our bread with hungry people. And again, there's an inconsistency. When somebody is starving at 70% of the grain, as we indicated, the U.S. is fed to animals destined for slaughter. The sixth mandate, all basic to Judaism, we are to seek and pursue peace. And Judaism teaches that violence results from unjust conditions, but as we indicated, animal-centered diets are very wasteful, and this perpetuates widespread hunger and poverty, which makes instability and war more likely. Matter of fact, it's indicated in the next slide that our sages saw that the Hebrew words for bread, lechem, and war, milchama, they come from the same root, and they deduce that when there's a shortage of bread, grain, and other resources, people are more likely to go to war. And that is why I came up with this idea. The slogan for the peace movement, the vegetarian movement, should be one and the same. A bit of a pun. All we're saying is give peas a chance. And they indicated animal-based diets contributing to global warming, and more military experts are seeing this is going to mean more and more hungry, desperate refugees fleeing from widespread floods and storms, droughts, wildfires, and that's going to create more possibility of instability, violence, terrorism, and war. So putting this all together in the next slide, and to summarize the case, these are 6 very important, very basic Jewish mandates that again point to vegetarianism as the ideal diet, preserving human health, compassion for animals, protecting the environment, conserving natural resources, helping feed hungry people, pursuing peace, and again, animal-based diets involving 60 billion farmed animals worldwide contradict these, and therefore is something that we should consider in terms of our diet, in terms of eliminating or greatly reducing consumption of animals. And the next slide, well, what about the future? And I want to really commend the Religious Action Center for having this seminar, and I hope they and other Jewish groups will get involved and respectfully challenge rabbis with these findings and say, can we get vegetarianism onto the Jewish agenda? Can we stage debates? Should Jews be vegetarians? I think this would show the relevance of Jewish values to the world today. And I think we have to stress that shift to vegetarianism is an important individual choice, but it's also a societal imperative. Not that every person has to become a vegetarian, but there should be a great movement toward vegetarian diets to reduce the epidemic of disease and also the many environmental threats. And I think as a final slide, we indicated I'm president of Jewish Vegetarians in North America, and this is just a very brief thumbnail sketch. I hope that others will contact me at president@jewishveg.com for more information, or go to the Jewish Vegetarian website indicated here, www.jewishveg.com, or go to where I have 150 articles, 25 podcasts, and my complete book, Judaism and Vegetarianism. That's at jewishveg.com, and a slash, and then the last name, SCHWARTZ. So again, I hope that vegetarians will more and more be on the Jewish agenda, and thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you so much. I certainly found your presentation enlightening, a lot of food for thought, and I'm sure this will definitely kind of lead into our Q&A. I'm sure there's folks out there who are interested in kind of hearing more, learning about some of the studies that you mentioned as well. So to move forward, I'd like to change topics a bit. You know, we're kind of giving you a little taste of a lot of different ideas today. just to kind of get those wheels churning, kind of thinking about, what does food justice and Judaism have to do with one another, and how do you make those choices yourself. So I'd like to introduce Rabbi Kevin Kleinman. Rabbi Kleinman hails from Reform Congregation Knesset Israel. He is a leader in Jewish environmental activism and food justice, and will be speaking today about the concept of mindful meat eating. Rabbi Kleinman?
Hello, everybody, and happy Food Day. I just want to thank Richard for giving a very quick and thorough introduction to certain Jewish ethical texts and traditions that help us understand more critically how we relate to the things that we eat in the world and the impact that has not only on the land, but for the animals and for the workers as well. And I'll pick up a little bit where he left off in a minute to fill in the story between the Garden of Eden and the Messianic time, and how we understand our opportunity to eat the full spectrum of food in between what was and what we hope will eventually be. Just for a few minutes to talk about my own background, I grew up in Northern Virginia in a house where we had meat and potatoes on a fairly regular basis, different forms of meat, burritos, hamburgers. We didn't necessarily put a lot of ethical thought into the decisions of the food we made. However, I do remember vividly going with my dad to the supermarket and learning how to cook when I was a teenager. So my personal connection to the food that I was eating started fairly young, from the time where I was cooking breakfast and packing my lunch and helping my dad with dinner. So I have always felt strongly connected to my own food preparation, and as I began to gain my own independence in college and have more direct access to my own food choices, my own eating shifted from that of my household of origin to the communities that I was finding myself living in college and post-college. And a critical moment in my own personal food eating was when I was in college. I was doing an internship, and I took a class with Coleman McCarthy at the Center for Teaching Peace in Washington, D.C. And this was a 6-week peace studies class. I was a sociology major and was influenced very much by his writing. And one of the videos that he showed in class was called Meet Your Meat, which was a movie full with slaughterhouse scenes set to different music. And I had already been thinking about eating more vegetarian, and it was pretty cool when I was at Camp Harlan to be a vegetarian. So I had done that the summer before, and really seeing what happened on slaughterhouse floors was something that shifted my eating away from meat and chicken for a period of about 6 years. Though I always personally ate fish, so I would have fallen into the pescatarian category. And after I graduated from Brandeis, I started working at the Teva Learning Center, which is a Jewish environmental organization located in Northwest Connecticut at the Isabella Friedman Retreat Center. And there were many vegetarians. In fact, the program itself was kosher and vegetarian. So we had to decide as a group what that meant for our own communal eating. And for the first time, I participated in a process of consensus eating. And I remember that during our staff training, we took a hike, and at the top of a mountain, we sat down with the 25 staff members, and each got a chance to speak about our own eating needs. Now, there were parameters already that everything had to be vegetarian in the house, and it had to be a kosher home. But between those two boundaries, there was room for, well, what kind of kosher does that mean? Does it mean that every product has to have a kosher stamp, a hechsher on it? Or can food that is inherently kosher but not marked with any particular symbol be brought into the kitchen? We also had the question of, what does exclusively vegetarian mean? Does that mean fish, or does that mean no fish? And so we had a compromise on our own individual needs based on what the greater good for the community was. So one example to illustrate that consensus process, there was a lake at the Isabella Friedman Retreat Center, and a friend of mine was really into fishing. So he would, from time to time, catch a fish in the lake, and we were not permitted according to our consensus process to cook it in the kitchen, but we were able to cook it on a campfire right next to the lake itself. So individuals got a choice of how they wanted to eat and what our individual needs are within the parameters of what were the guidelines from the program were really how we decided as a community of what we wanted to eat. And I recommend consensus eating as something that as you begin to look at your institutional food policies, that you can give individual members of your organization a say, even if you have specific parameters about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. For instance, my own congregation here at KI does not have a kosher kitchen, but we do not allow shellfish or pork. So within those boundaries, it allows a great deal of freedom and flexibility to think about what is the food that we want to serve at our synagogue, as well as when people have celebrations, the food that they're able to bring in. So I'll speak more about that in a moment. I wanted to just finish my own personal eating story and then jump into where Richard Schwartz kind of left off there on his presentation. So after I worked for Teva, I started getting more involved in different food movement activities, particularly with Hazon. And when I was in rabbinical school, I was in Jerusalem. And as a vegetarian living in Jerusalem, I found that when I would go to Shabbat meals, often the vegetarian options were the things that were the not meat options. So I found that vegetarianism was actually more limited in Jerusalem in the circles that I was traveling in at HUC. And so I began to eat the meat slowly that was being served at the Shabbat tables or the Shabbat meals being put on by the rabbinic school. And slowly eating meat for me on Shabbat became a way that I became more comfortable again with eating meat. And then later, as I was living in Brooklyn, I started joining a food co-op. And then when I moved to Philadelphia, a community-supported agriculture program. So for me, finding out where my food comes from and how the food is treated becomes the primary concern that I have in making my own food choices. So I'm not going to go too much into the next slide for a second. Perfect. So looking at the biblical shift from vegetarianism to meat consumption, Richard is absolutely right that there's an ideal in the Torah where he says in Genesis 1:29, God says, "See, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit, they shall be yours for food." So the general understanding is before the flood, from the time of the creation of man until the great flood with Noah, the human diet was vegetarianism. After the flood in Genesis 9, every creature that lives shall be yours to eat. As with the green grasses, I give you all these. There are a number of reasons that human beings are told they can eat meat after the flood. The most common midrash is that human beings had a thirst for blood that was only being satiated by killing one another. So in order to assuage that need to kill from human to human, God allows the killing of animals under certain conditions to be consumed by human beings. And the two basic conditions in the Torah are that the animals themselves had to be fit, they had to be kosher animals, and typically meat was only eaten that was sacrificed for certain of the sacrificial rites. So it wasn't that meat was the primary part of the diet. In fact, it probably would have been a sacred part of the diet. So going from the biblical to the medieval times, we get the notion that meat is something that Jews eat on the Sabbath and on holidays. And in fact, the Rambam says, one is obligated to be happy and good-hearted on Yom Tov, him, his wife, and children, and all those depending on him. How does one make them happy? Children are supplied with nash, and women are supplied with fine clothes and jewelry. According to one's financial means, men consume meat and wine as simcha can only be had with meat and wine. So there was this notion that meat brought more joy. And in a time period where people were probably struggling just to eat, there was a notion that one should have their finest food available on the Sabbath and on holidays. And for Jews living in the medieval period, that meant having a chicken on Shabbat or having certain meats at certain sacred and holy times, fitting along with the biblical notion that eating meat was something that should not be taken for granted. So moving to the next slide. Now, looking at the modern idea of what a Jewish omnivore's dilemma is, Michael Pollan has famously said, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And I believe his own perspective is influenced by his Jewish identity, which goes back thousands of years to a time where actually people ate mostly vegetables, as was the case in the beginning of time before the flood. And then after the flood, meat eating was permitted under certain circumstances. And from that time forward, that has been the primary way that Jewish communities have eaten over time. You can move to the next slide. Within that, of course, different people in different places and different times have had different understandings of diet, and that has informed the different festival foods, the different holiday foods, the different traditional foods of Ashkenazi Jews or Sephardic Jews or Jews from Yemen or Iraq. And each community has made food a central part of their experience as Jews. So today in the modern synagogue, we too have a choice to look at the food that we serve in our congregations or our institutions and figure out how we live by our modern Jewish food ethics. And I have a couple examples here on the slide of organizations that have really made a significant effort to combine ethics, religion, and modern diet. One would be Grow and Behold Meat. That this is a company who is really making kosher meat available that is farmed locally here outside of Philadelphia, and it's raised without hormones or antibiotics. It's something that within the kosher meat-eating community is not very widely available. So in fact, I'm part of a system with them where people can order online in my synagogue and pick up once a month meat made available by Grow and Behold. And as our congregation thinks more critically about what we serve at Shabbat meals, we hope to be able to serve more and more meat provided by Grow and Behold within our congregational setting. Likewise, in thinking about the ethics of the workers and the environment, I strongly encourage synagogues to think about having fair trade coffee, tea, and sugar available. If you go to the Equal Exchange website, they make this available at a big discount for religious organizations. And most importantly, when you as a synagogue or an institution are looking at your food choices, creating educational opportunities in the community, having signs about what food you're serving and why, articles and bulletins, sermons, special programs, etc., to really build a consensus about what we as a Jewish community aspire to be serving as reflected by our modern food values and the food ethics that have been part of our tradition for thousands and thousands of years.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rabbi Kleinman, for your presentation, for sharing these thought-provoking ideas and how we can live our values while mindfully eating meat, both in our personal lives and also in this communal space, and how we come to make those decisions and educate our community. So thank you very much. Next, I'd like to pass it along. I'd like to introduce Anna Hanau. Anna is the Associate Director of Food Programs at Hazon, and Anna is going to be speaking to all of us today about eating locally, what that means, and how it can be done. Anna.
Great, thank you. I love that I'm following a setup of not eating meat and then eating meat. Both of them are good arguments. And I think what I'm going to say, talking about eating locally, plays into both of them. What I really want to talk about with this phrase of eating locally, or what is local, we can talk about how we define that, whether it's food from within 100 miles or 200 miles or just simply your part of the world, however you define that. It's kind of a buzzword, it's kind of trendy. For me, those aren't the reasons that I do it. For me, it's about eating food with a story. And that's a very Jewish thing to do. Can you go to the next slide there, Naomi? Oops. Okay, that's a good slide, but not the one I was expecting. I'll just give a few examples of what I mean by local food. I'm not sure about the PowerPoint, but we'll figure it out. I grew up in Vancouver, British Columbia. There are blackberries that grow wild everywhere on the sides of the road, on the paths on the walk to school. So food that definitely connects me to place right away is blackberries. And whenever I'm in the Pacific Northwest around the end of the summer, eating blackberries is not only because I love blackberries, but because it's a food of the place. It's a food that only happens in that place in that way. Other kind of local foods that are fun for me, we get these amazing peaches from a farm called the Kirby's in Rochester. My mother-in-law gets them. We serve them at our wedding. And just knowing that I'm biting into a Kirby peach is a special treat. I've got jars of pickles in my fridge from the Adama farm. They make pickles and dilly beans and sauerkraut. And I also am part of a raw milk co-op, which is not, I won't give you all the details online, but you can email me about it. But there too, I'm saying, who's raising the cows, who's taking care of the milk. In all of these examples of food, it's food with a story. I can look at my plate and say, I know about this food. I know about the place where it came. I know about the values of the people that raised it. And I'm not just eating food because it tastes good. I'm eating food because it connects me to that land. It connects me to those ideas. I think that plays out, just deviating a little bit, the question of meat versus vegetarian. You could have an option to eat. It could be that your meat comes from far away from a feedlot somewhere in the middle of nowhere that you're not connected to, and that you've got perfectly delicious vegetables grown down the road. It could be that you're eating tofu from China, and there's actually, a sustainable meat co-op in your part of the world. So I don't think that the two are, it's not one or the other, and there's reasons, to go for both. When you go to the next slide. Let's see. So another reason besides the story for eating local, cutting down on the carbon, so shipping food across the country, refrigerated planes, refrigerated trucks, it's a ton of energy. It's a ton of greenhouse gases. We don't need to do it. The fact is we can actually grow food in many places of the world. And if you can't grow it, if it's the winter, we used to have ways of preserving food. So thinking about freezing or drying or canning when your season is in abundance to preserve, that also cuts down on some of the need to ship food across the country. Next slide. Eat your view. This is another reason I like to tell people about why you should eat local. If you're like me and you love driving through the beautiful countryside, those farmers need to make a living. We need to buy the food that they make for them to be able to keep their farms and keep in business. These pictures are from New York State. New York State has seen a huge drop in dairy farmers, so the idyllic cows that we love to see, we just don't see them as much anymore. And I think that's a real loss. There are tons of farmlands being developed into condos and subdivisions, and once you put a house on a farmland, you can't get that land back. We can't get that topsoil back. So putting value in the world that we want to live in sometimes requires paying for it. Next slide. Enjoy the season. So eating locally means you're eating food from nearby. Depending on where you live, different things grow at different times of year. So my first introduction to learning about food issues came in college. I was learning about community gardens. I was learning about some of the stuff going on in conventional ag. And I decided that I would only eat strawberries when they were in season. I was living in New York, so that meant June. So fruit platters, with like the sliced melon, pineapple, and the strawberries are never actually that good. I just decided I would not eat strawberries. And sometimes, it's a little hard. You like strawberries, you want to eat them, but actually holding out, and then when I first had that first strawberry in June, it was amazing. It was delicious. It was a special treat, and you kind of go on this strawberry binge of how many jams and pies and, what else can I do with strawberries, and then it's over. And then you've got some jam, maybe, if you've put up, but then you have that to look forward to again. So in the picture, I just put some foods that come at different times of the year. Parsley in the top right is an early herb that grows. Tomatoes and peppers and eggplants actually come later in the season. They're more of a end of summer and Sukkot almost time, or Rosh Hashanah time. So it's really, it's an interesting way to notice that time is passing if you're actually connected to what's growing where you live. Great. Next slide. So talked about some reasons why you might want to eat local. How do you eat local? Lots of different ways. It's becoming easier and easier. Kevin mentioned that he's part of a community-supported agriculture program. This is essentially where you buy a share of a farm for the entire season, and then once a week you go and pick up, and the farm brings in whatever they have ripe. You might also get to go out to visit your farm, so these pictures show a farm share from a box, and then on the left that's Karen Fleisch, who was out visiting a CSA farm with an exciting-looking carrot that she pulled up. So not only are you getting really fresh, really local food, you're knowing who's growing it, and you might actually even get to go out to the place where your food is grown. It's kind of like having a personal vegetable grower, which when you think about it is pretty neat. So that's a great option, and there's more and more of them. Chazon helps to set up some community-supported agriculture programs in the Jewish community across the United States. So if you don't have a CSA near you, feel free to talk to me about it afterwards. We can talk about that. Next slide. Farmers markets, another great way. They're growing, and you want to, again, as in any place, you want to, buyer beware. You want to talk to your farmer. You want to make sure that they're not just buying stuff off a truck, but there are an amazing number of farmers markets that have sprung up where you can really buy local produce. Next slide. A couple of Local Harvest is a great website if you don't know it for finding a farmer's market or a CSA or simply a farm near you. PickYourOwn.org has a really cheesy font, but it's a great place to find Pick Your Own farms. So check out those two resources. Next slide, I mentioned canning and freezing a lot. We used to do a lot more of this as a culture. It's becoming hip again. It's not that complicated. Lots of tutorials online. It's fun thing to do with kids, and it really is great. I put the picture of the spinach when I was living at a farm. We had a bumper spinach crop, and I actually harvested a ton of it, parboiled it, froze it in little hamburger-sized patties, and I had spinach all winter long, to throw into a stir fry. So, and it was really great. Every time I took it out, I could think about what it was like when the spinach was actually still growing. And next slide. You can also grow your own, and this doesn't have to be on a whole farm. The top left picture is a 4x8 box that I have in my backyard. You can see lettuce and different things starting, or it might be as simple as starting with herbs on your windowsill. Just tuning into that little bit is a great place to start. Of course, there are community gardens, which is also an option if you don't have land of your own. Next slide. Kevin touched on the equal exchange a little bit. Of course, there are some things that don't grow in the United States, chocolate and coffee being two important ones of these, olive oil. I guess we can grow it in California, but not everywhere. So it's not the case that you maybe want to be a fanatic about it and only eat local, but certainly things that can grow locally, try for that. But for stuff that is coming from far away, different programs like Equal Exchange and Fair Trade will let you know kind of farming by proxy what's going on in the places where those crops are produced, and it's good to pay attention to that. Next slide. So there's my picture. Food with a story, the blackberries, the peaches, the pickles. Having a connection to land, having a connection to the people who are doing the work. A lot of people making food are just in it to make money, and I like to eat food that was made by someone who's in the business of feeding people, and I think there's a difference, and I think that's, it's very Jewish, and it has a lot of potential for connection. And I think that's it. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anna. Now we really want to kind of open the floor to you to invite questions from you, and our panelists will join us. I know Anna has to jump off shortly, but while you guys, again, once again, you're welcome to type questions into the question log box. Virtually, raise your hand. You're welcome to do as well, and we'll hopefully have some time to chat with some folks online. We've already gotten a bunch of questions in. I'm going to kind of kick it off by asking each of our presenters to provide advice for first steps. If somebody was interested in maybe exploring a vegetarian diet, exploring mindful meat eating or local eating, what is your recommended first step for them?
Okay.
Don't all jump at once.
Okay, I hope people go, as I indicated, to our website, jewishveg.com. We've got all kinds of recipes there, and people should realize that, thank God, there are so many more nutritious vegetarian foods today. It's more and more. You go to supermarkets, health food stores. Somebody mentioned tofu, and then there's all kinds of soy products, et cetera, et cetera. And so, very fine choice of foods there. Also, more and more vegetarian restaurants, so it's much easier than some years ago. And I just wanted to point out very briefly, talking a little bit with what Rabbi Klein was saying, that there definitely is a choice today, because there are many cheap rabbis in Israel that are vegetarian, and Psachim 109a, the Talmud, indicates that now that there's no temple, it is not necessary to eat meat, and people can rejoice on the Sabbath day with wine, for example.
This is Rabbi Kleinman. I would say experiment a little bit in your diet. So I think it goes both ways. There are a couple questions that asked about energy, and I know limiting one's meat consumption can drastically impact the reduction of resources needed to grow the food that feeds the meat, to ship the meat from point A to point B. So my presentation about meat eating was about conscious meat eating and not just using meat as a default. So I would challenge those who eat a lot of meat to cut down on the quantity and increase their understanding of where their meat comes from, what it's fed, how it's slaughtered if kashrut is an issue, and the process by which it gets from the farm that it's raised to the table that you're eating it. And that would be my first place to start there.
This is Anna. Just in terms of eating local, I'd say go to a farmer's market. Even better, go to a farm. Just go to a farm. See what's going on. Talk to a farmer. Find out what it's like to grow food. Find out what food grows where you are. I guarantee you that, full of amazing things. Peppers have a curved stem because they start out growing upside down, and when they get so heavy, they fall over. Not something you need to know, but I think it makes them taste more delicious, and it's just essential to connect to the seasons and to living, growing things that we've lost by just buying food in a supermarket.
Great, thank you all. And just a reminder again, if you can mute yourselves when you're not talking, I think we're getting a little bit of background noise. So I guess I want to ask everyone that, a few people have raised these points. How do you respond to the argument when it comes to meat eating about energy inefficiency of eating animals, even if humanely raised, and also some of the health challenges associated with eating meat?
This is Anna. I'm going to jump in because I have to jump off early, if I may. I just want to, we all know that it is not simple, but another plug for that. There's some land that you just can't grow vegetables on. It's too steep, it's not well irrigated, whatever it is. You can raise meat on it. Meat in some ways is just converted sunlight. So in that sense, it is efficient, especially if you're talking about meat that's raised in a pasture-based system, using grass, using natural energy. And the other thing I just want to say is people need different amounts of meat. Some people, really need to eat a lot. Some people need to eat not so much. So, I don't think that there's a blanket right amount for every person, but I do think Kevin's point of really critically thinking about the meat that you do eat, saying, do I really need to eat all this meat, and can I buy the best possible meat on all accounts?
Okay. Yeah, this is Richard, and jump in here. I think it's very important to recognize the very unfortunate facts that the world is rapidly approaching climate catastrophe, water catastrophe, food catastrophe, energy catastrophes, and you know, at this point, the idea that we're raising 60 billion farmed animals with all the negatives on that we're feeding so much grain to them, we're using so much water for them, that they're contributing so much to climate change, that this has to be considered and all. And just to reinforce what I'm saying, every day we see reports that the ice sheets are melting up north, the glaciers are melting, and heat waves. Last year was the warmest year in history. Israel is now facing a drought for like 7 years. And Texas this year, tremendous heat wave, wildfires. So something's going on out there. So this has to be an essential issue in the Jewish community that we have to look on it and say, can we afford to continue raising 60 billion farmed animals? Can we continue 70% of the grain being fed to animals when there's so much hunger out there? And can we consider using so much energy and water shortages? These are the critical problems that are facing the world more and more, and that's why I'm hoping that Religious Action Center, other Jewish groups will continue and put vegetarianism, or diets in general. Not everybody has to be vegetarian, but certainly there should be, as some have indicated on the panel, less eating meat, and you know, just much more concern about our diets.
Thank you. Actually, Rabbi Kleiman, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I saw there was a question about the justice side of food on the production side and on the access side. Do you mind if I answer that question?
Please.
So food justice is something that our congregation is getting really connected into on the two sides that Noah Farkas asked the question. So at the same time that we have the luxury of talking about where does our food come from, we acknowledge that there are many in our community, in the world, who go hungry not because it's a choice that we make to fast on Yom Kippur. This was an example I gave, but because they lack resources to provide enough food for themselves, enough food and enough healthy food. So looking at the FDA's definition of food insecurity, we know that 15% of Americans do not have enough healthy food at one point over the course of the last year. So looking at food as a justice issue, there are many examples in the Torah and in our rabbinic tradition of leaving food for the hungry, of ensuring that those that are hungry are invited into our home to eat. And the question that we grapple with is, if we have a limited amount of money to help people eat, how do we use that money the best that we can use it? And so when we do a project each year around Christmas time to feed the homeless population of Philadelphia, we actually order food from mainstream sources because we can get more food for our money than if we were looking to have everything be organic or local or sustainable. And at the same time, I continually push our congregation to think about issues of health of the workers who are creating our food, health of the planet, as Richard is talking about, the health of the animals. So it's a very complex issue when we're looking at food and food justice. And I would say depending on the need and depending on the project and depending on the intent, that these choices don't have to be made the same every single time. And in the most ideal situation, we're helping to end the food deserts by bringing in farmers markets and teaching families how to cook and prepare food that's locally grown. That's the best of all cases. And when we can't achieve the best case scenario, then we work backwards to how do we at least feed in a healthy way the most amount of people we can, because it's something that we are not doing as well as we can as a society.
Thank you so much. And unfortunately, although we do have some extra questions, we don't want to run over our time too much. But I did want to bring up a few other key resources that speak to these questions and really, this discussion, which is, let's educate ourselves and our communities. And we have some great resources to help you do that and to also act, in terms of advocacy opportunities and educational ones. So one of the tools that you have available to you is urj.org/food. On this page, you'll see tons of resources, curriculum material, sample sermons, food policies. All of these things can be adapted, can be tools to help you engage in this conversation. Of course, you can go to this page to keep you informed on pressing food justice advocacy campaigns that the Union for Reform Judaism and the Religious Action Center are running. We encourage you to visit that page. Another great resource, if you really want to engage your community in this discussion, is RAC Reads, the Religious Action Center's book club. We on this book club have reading guides. Two of them speak to these questions that have been brought up. More and more are continuing to be added. If you have suggestions for books that you think would make great book club discussions on this topic, please let us know. And there's also some helpful tips to get started. And if you are interested in taking action right now, you can go on foodday.org and ask Congress to support Food Day's goals. And that's something that you can do right now. You can forward that to people that you know, family and friends, and really take action in that way right now. You'll also then probably be looped into the other work that they're doing throughout the year moving forward. So again, I just want to thank each of you for attending this webinar, for engaging in this important conversation. A special thanks to our presenters. I know that we kind of threw out a bunch of different ideas and concepts of how do we eat ethically. And when you ask that question, there's a lot of different answers. These are three, somewhat overlapping, somewhat not. But hopefully this is encouraging you to kind of think about what your food consumption means and how that plays into the bigger picture. So again, just to remind you, this webinar and PowerPoint are going to be archived on our website. You're welcome to go on there and download the pieces, get all the resources that you saw. If you have a question that wasn't addressed, you're welcome to contact Susan Pakin. And oh, excuse me, her email is wrong on here. It's not the last D. So it's spakin@rac.org, and she'll be able to help answer your question and connect you with some of the speakers. So again, thank you. Happy Food Day and happy eating. Have a good afternoon.
Happy Food Day. Bye-bye.